Rain tapped against the cafe windows, soft and steady, like it was trying to tell me something I couldn't quite hear. I was wiping down the counter when she walked in, Leah, wrapped in a cream coat that made her look like she belonged somewhere far from here. She smiled at me, that same smile that always felt like a secret, and for a second, the whole place seemed warmer. She ordered her usual, but tonight she didn't make small talk. She stirred her coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the swirl of cream, like she was thinking about something she couldn't say out loud. When she finally spoke, it wasn't about the weather or the book she was reading. It was about an offer. A life-changing offer from someone rich, older, and ready to give her the world. I laughed, a little too quickly, pretending it didn't sting. But then she tilted her head, met my eyes, and said something that made my chest tighten. Or, she said softly, you could have one night with me instead. I stood there, holding my breath, realizing that sometimes the choice isn't between good and bad. Sometimes, it's between safe, and the one thing your heart's been waiting for. The rain had been falling since the afternoon, soft at first, then heavier, the kind that blurred the city lights into hazy colors and made the air smell like wet pavement and coffee grounds. Inside the cafe, the hum of the espresso machine and the low murmur of customers' conversations filled the space. I had been wiping down the counter for the third time, not because it needed it, but because I was counting the minutes until closing. My feet ached, my hair was frizzing from the damp air, and I had already decided I would walk home just to feel the rain on my face. That was before the bell above the door chimed and she walked in. Leah. The sight of her always hit me the same way, like someone had opened a window and let in air I didn't know I needed. She wore a cream-colored coat, tailored perfectly, with a thin belt tied loosely at her waist. Her hair, dark and damp at the ends, framed her face in soft waves. She carried herself like someone who had learned long ago that every step could be a performance, yet there was nothing fake about her. Her eyes found mine immediately, and the corners of her mouth curved into that smile, the one I had only ever seen directed at me. It was small, private, like we shared some unspoken joke no one else would get. She slid into her usual seat near the window, setting her bag on the chair beside her. I moved automatically, starting her drink before she even asked. We'd known each other for a few months now, me behind the counter, her stopping in 2 or 3 times a week. We talked about small things most days. Music. The book she carried in her bag. The weather, which she always claimed she loved, no matter how bad it was. But that night, there was something different in the way she sat, her shoulders slightly hunched, her gaze distant as though she was sitting in the cafe but thinking about somewhere far away. I set her cup down in front of her and leaned on the counter just enough to close the distance between us. Rough day? I asked lightly. She looked up, her eyes sharp and clear despite the tiredness in them, and for a moment she didn't answer. Instead, she stirred the coffee slowly, watching the swirl of cream mix into the dark liquid. I got an offer, she said finally, her voice soft but deliberate. An offer I probably shouldn't refuse. I tried to smile, as though she'd told me something casual, but my curiosity tugged at me. What kind of offer? She exhaled, almost like she'd been holding her breath. From a woman I know. She's wealthy. Very wealthy. She said she could take care of me. Everything I'd ever need, security, travel, the kind of life where I'd never have to worry about money again. Her words landed like stones in my stomach. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. Sounds generous, I managed to say, but even I could hear the strain in my voice. She studied me for a moment, like she was trying to read the thoughts I was fighting to keep hidden. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, she said, or, she paused, letting the word linger, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You could have one night with me instead. My fingers tightened around the rag in my hand. I blinked, unsure if she was teasing, testing me, or offering something real. Her tone hadn't been playful, it had been steady, like she was presenting two paths and asking me to choose one. I laughed, but it came out weaker than I intended, more of a nervous breath than a real laugh. "That's a strange choice to put on the table," I said, trying to keep my voice light, but my chest felt tight. "Is it?" she asked, her eyes never leaving mine. There was no smirk, no trace of irony, just that calm, steady look, as if she already knew the effect her words had on me. She took a sip of her coffee, then glanced out the window where the rain streaked down in silver lines against the glass. I busied myself at the counter, wiping down a surface that didn't need cleaning, just to give my hands something to do. In the back of my mind, I could feel the weight of her words settling in, heavy and unavoidable. A millionaire's offer, everything she could ever want, everything I could never give her, or one night with me. Just one night. But in my gut, I knew that wasn't what she was really asking. It was about more than time, more than money. It was about the choice itself, about what it would mean to turn her back on the safe option and step into the unknown. I wanted to tell her right then that I didn't need a night. I wanted more than that. I wanted mornings and arguments and laughter and the way her eyes softened when she looked at me. But my voice wouldn't cooperate. Instead, I handed her the napkin she always forgot to take and said quietly, "That's not a choice I can make for you." She gave a small nod, her gaze lingering on me for a heartbeat longer before she turned back to her coffee. The rain kept falling, steady and quiet, as if the whole world was waiting for her answer. And maybe, in a way, so was I. The rain hadn't stopped by the time I closed the cafe, and I didn't bother opening my umbrella. The streets were slick and shining under the glow of the streetlights, the air cool enough to sting my cheeks. My shoes were already damp, and with each step the water seeped in a little more, but I didn't care. My mind was too busy replaying her words over and over, like a song stuck on repeat. An offer from a millionaire. A life she wouldn't have to fight for, where bills would never stack up, where every door would open for her without question. And then, against all logic, the other choice she'd placed on the table, a single night with me. It didn't sound like much when I said it in my head. It didn't sound like something anyone would pick over a lifetime of comfort and security. But the way she'd said it, the way her eyes had held mine, made me wonder if the choice wasn't about time at all. I knew what I should think. I should tell myself that the millionaire's offer was too big to compete with, that I shouldn't let my heart get tangled in this. I'd seen enough in life to know how things went. People chose the path that made sense, the one that gave them safety, the one that promised they'd never have to count loose change at the bottom of their purse. That wasn't me. I didn't have wealth to offer, only the uneven hours from my cafe job, a tiny apartment that leaked when it rained too hard, and a heart that wanted her far more than it should. I tried to imagine what it would be like if she said yes to me. I pictured her in my space, curled up on my couch with her expensive coat thrown over the armrest, her bare feet tucked under her, smiling at me like we were the only two people left in the world. But then the image shifted, replaced with the thought of her standing in some grand penthouse, wearing silk and diamonds, her smile reserved for someone else, the woman who could give her everything. That thought hurt in a way I didn't want to admit. By the time I reached my building, my hair was plastered to my forehead and the cuffs of my jeans clung cold against my skin. I let myself in, the door creaking like it always did, and tossed my wet bag onto the chair. The quiet of my apartment felt heavier than usual, like it was pressing against me. I put on water for tea, more for the comfort of the routine than for the drink itself, and sat at the small kitchen table with my phone in hand. My fingers hovered over the screen, wanting to type something, anything, to her. I wanted to ask if she was serious. I wanted to tell her I'd choose her 100 times over, even if it was just for one night, even if it meant losing her after. I wanted to tell her that sometimes safety isn't worth what you have to give up for it. But every version of the message I wrote felt too raw, too desperate, too much like giving her the answer she hadn't asked for yet. I deleted each one, watching the little blinking cursor disappear again and again. Instead, I sat there listening to the rain hit the windows, imagining her somewhere across the city, maybe still in that cafe seat long after I'd left, maybe already at home, maybe thinking about me, or maybe already picturing a life I couldn't give her. I remembered all the small moments we'd shared, the way she'd once laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee when I told her about the time I tripped over my own shoelace in front of a wedding party, the soft hum she made when she was reading something she liked, the way she sometimes lingered after finishing her drink as if she didn't want to leave just yet. None of it was big or glamorous, but it was ours. And maybe that was why the idea of her choosing someone else, choosing that other life, felt like losing something before I ever really had it. I stayed at the table for a long time, the tea going cold beside me, the city noises fading into the background. My phone stayed on the table too, the screen dark, waiting. I thought about sending her just 3 words, "Don't choose her," but even that felt like a kind of selfishness I couldn't justify. If she chose the millionaire, it wouldn't be because she didn't see me. It would be because she saw the life she thought she needed. And maybe that was the worst part, knowing that loving someone doesn't always mean they'll choose you, no matter how much you want them to. When I finally got up to go to bed, I left the phone on the table, face down. I didn't want to see if she messaged. I didn't want to wait for something that might not come. But I knew I would still think about her when I lay down, still imagine what it would be like if she walked through my door and told me she'd made her choice, and it was me. I knew I'd imagine that over and over, until sleep took me, or the morning came, whichever came first. The next morning the cafe felt different, though nothing about it had changed. The same low hum of conversation, the same clinking of cups and soft hiss of steam from the espresso machine, the same smell of fresh ground beans and baked bread drifting through the air. Yet beneath all that, I felt a quiet tension, like the moment just before a storm breaks. I tried to focus on work, greeting customers, making drinks, smiling when I needed to, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time the bell above the door chimed, my heart reacted before my eyes did, a small, involuntary jump in my chest. It was ridiculous, I told myself, to expect her to walk in, to expect anything from her at all. But then, just before noon, she did. Leah stepped inside, brushing the cold from her hair, the faint sheen of rain on her coat making it look even softer. She looked tired. Not in the way of someone who hadn't slept, but in the way of someone who had been carrying too many thoughts for too long. Even in that weariness, she was beautiful, maybe more beautiful than I'd ever seen her. She gave me that small nod she always did, a wordless greeting that felt like it carried more meaning than any hello could. I started her usual drink without asking, the familiar rhythm of our ritual somehow grounding me. When I brought it to her table, I caught a trace of her perfume, expensive, understated, the kind of scent that lingered in the air long after she'd gone. She was dressed simply today, a fitted black sweater and dark jeans, but everything about her still looked deliberate. Her bag was set neatly by her chair, the clasp closed, her phone face down. She wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers, and looked at me in that way she sometimes did, like she was trying to decide if I was safe enough for whatever words she was holding back. We spoke about nothing for a while, the weather, the new book she was reading. I asked her if it was good and she said it was fine, but her tone was flat, distracted. Then, almost casually, she said, she wants my answer by the end of the week. I didn't have to ask who she was. The words made my chest tighten, the air in the room suddenly feeling thinner. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. And what are you going to tell her? Leah stirred her coffee slowly, watching the tiny whirlpool form and disappear. I don't know, she said, her voice quiet. It's not as simple as yes or no. I'm trying to think about what I need, not just what I want. Something in me cracked at that. Before I could stop myself, the word slipped out, do you even want that life? She didn't look surprised by my question. Her gaze lifted to mine, steady and unflinching. It's not about want, she said softly. It's about survival. The answer landed heavy in the space between us. I understood more than I wanted to admit. There was a weight in her eyes, the kind you get from years of holding yourself together because you know no one else will. It made me ache for her in a way I couldn't put into words. I wanted to reach across the table, to take her hand, to tell her I understood that safety could feel like love when you'd lived without either for too long. But I stayed still, my fingers curled into my palms, afraid that touching her would make me say things I couldn't take back. She leaned back in her chair, letting her gaze wander toward the window, where the rain streaked down the glass in thin, uneven lines. I watched her watch the rain, wondering if she was imagining herself somewhere else, on a balcony high above the city, in a home with marble floors and silk sheets, or if she was imagining herself here, in the life she already had, where comfort was measured in small moments and warmth came from a hand around a cup of coffee. We talked a little more, about safe things, but the conversation kept circling back to silences. It was as if both of us were aware of the clock ticking toward the end of the week, each passing second pressing against us. Eventually, she glanced at her watch and sighed. I should go, she said, her tone gentle but final. She stood, slipping her bag over her shoulder, and I walked her to the door without meaning to. As she stepped outside, she turned back for the briefest second, her eyes meeting mine in a way that made my pulse quicken. And then she was gone, her figure disappearing into the blur of umbrellas and wet streets. I stayed by the door for a moment longer than I should have, staring out at the rain, my reflection faint in the glass. It was only when the bell chimed again for another customer that I moved back behind the counter, carrying her absence like a weight in my chest. The day went on, customers came and went, the hours slid past, but every time I glanced toward her empty seat by the window, I felt the echo of her presence there, and the question she hadn't answered yet hanging over both of us. That night I couldn't stop thinking about her words, how she had said it wasn't about what she wanted, it was about survival. The phrase kept replaying in my head, heavier each time, until it felt like I was carrying part of her burden without her even knowing. I didn't know much about Leah's past, not in any detailed way. She wasn't the kind of person who volunteered her history. Most of what I knew came from small slips in conversation or little pieces she'd let fall when she thought no one was really listening. Still, I'd heard things from others, mutual acquaintances who seemed to think they were doing me a favor by telling me the kind of life she'd come from. She hadn't been born into the world she looked like she belonged to. No. She'd grown up in a home that was fragile in every way, unstable parents, constant moves, bills always late, dreams constantly put on hold. The kind of childhood where you learned early that nothing was guaranteed, not even the basics, and you either got tough or you got crushed. She'd worked hard, harder than most people would ever understand, to step into a life that didn't match the one she came from. She'd built an image for herself, something polished and graceful, but I could tell it was more armor than decoration. Behind it was someone who knew exactly what it felt like to go without, to want stability so badly you'd trade pieces of yourself for it if you had to. The millionaire's offer wasn't just a romantic proposal, it was an escape route, a ticket into a life where she would never again have to calculate whether she could afford both rent and groceries in the same week. And maybe that's what haunted me most, knowing that if I were in her place, I couldn't say with certainty that I wouldn't take it too. Still, selfishly, I didn't want her to. I didn't want her to disappear into someone else's world, wearing someone else's gifts, living by someone else's rules. I wanted her here, even if it meant both of us standing in the rain wondering how we'd make next month work. I wanted to believe that sometimes love could be enough, even if logic and experience told me it rarely was. I was lying in bed, staring at the cracks in my ceiling, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with her name, and my chest tightened before I even read the message. It was short, almost cryptic. "If I say no to her, will you be here?" I stared at it for a long time, my thumbs hovering above the keyboard. The obvious answer was yes. Of course I would be here. I would always be here, even if I shouldn't be. But the question wasn't as simple as it looked. She wasn't just asking if I'd be around, she was asking if I'd be steady, if I'd be something she could count on when everything else got harder. Saying yes wasn't a promise I could make lightly, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew the reality of what that promise would mean. It meant being there not only for the easy moments, but for the nights when the weight of her decision pressed too hard, for the days when she missed the comfort she'd turned down, for the fights we might have when the strain showed in ways neither of us wanted to admit. I wanted to tell her yes anyway, to send the word in big, certain letters, but I kept imagining how it might read on her screen, how much or how little she might read into it. So instead of replying right away, I set the phone down beside me and closed my eyes, thinking of the first time I'd seen her. I remembered the way she'd stepped into the cafe like she belonged there and yet somehow didn't, how she'd looked both confident and slightly unsure, how her smile had been warmer than I'd expected. Back then, I hadn't thought about what her life looked like outside those four walls. I hadn't considered the weight she carried, the survival she talked about. I just liked the way she made the air feel lighter when she was near. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting at that cafe table, stirring her coffee like it was the only thing keeping her grounded, asking me questions without saying them out loud. The rain kept falling outside, steady and soft, and I lay there wondering if she was awake too, holding her phone, waiting for an answer I hadn't sent. By the following afternoon, I'd made up my mind that I couldn't keep skirting around this, couldn't keep letting her walk in and out of my life with all these questions hanging between us like invisible wires. I wanted to give her an answer, not to the offer she'd been given, but to the question she'd asked me in that message. So I sent her one of my own. It was simple, meet me by the river tonight. 8 o'clock, I stared at the screen for a moment after hitting send, half expecting her to ignore it or politely decline. But within a few minutes, her reply came, "I'll be there." The words settled into me, a mixture of relief and nerves twisting together. The rest of my shift dragged on, every cup of coffee and every small order feeling like a task between me and the moment I'd been replaying in my head all day. By the time the sun started dipping toward the horizon, I'd already changed into warmer clothes, a thick sweater and my heaviest coat, and walked the familiar path toward the river. The air was sharp with the kind of cold that made your breath visible, and the ground was still damp from the rain that had fallen earlier. Streetlights flickered on as I approached the bridge, casting pale golden reflections over the water. She was already there when I arrived, leaning against the railing with her hands shoved into her pockets. Her hair was loose, catching the light, and she wore a scarf wound neatly around her neck. She looked like a painting, still and composed, but there was something in her posture that betrayed the weight she was carrying. When she saw me, she straightened, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You picked a cold night," she said, her voice soft but edged with something I couldn't name. I stepped up beside her, resting my hands on the railing. "I didn't want to do this in the cafe," I admitted. "Too many people, too many ears. This felt better." She nodded, turning her gaze back toward the slow, dark current below. For a while, we just stood there, our breaths misting in the cold air, letting the quiet stretch between us. I could feel my pulse in my throat, each beat a push to finally speak. "About your message," I began, my voice careful. You asked if I'd be here if you said no to her. Her eyes stayed on the water, but I saw her shoulders tense slightly. And? I hesitated. I didn't want to say it wrong. I didn't want to make it sound like some romantic gesture that wouldn't hold up when things got hard. Yes, I said finally. I'd be here. But not just for one night, Leah. Not as some temporary thing to make you feel better about turning her down. If you chose me, I'd want it to be because you wanted a life with me, not just a moment. She was quiet for a long time, the only sound the faint lapping of the river against the shore. Then she exhaled, the sound almost like a laugh, though there was no humor in it. You make it sound so simple, she murmured. I shook my head. It's not simple. I know it's not. I know saying no to her means saying no to stability, to comfort, to the kind of life you've worked so hard to get close to. I can't give you those things. I wish I could, but I can't. All I can give you is me, and the promise that I won't disappear when it gets messy. She turned to face me then, her eyes searching mine in the dim light. Happiness isn't always where it's safe, she said quietly, almost like she was saying it to herself more than to me. I nodded. No. But sometimes the risk is worth it. Her gaze lingered, and for a second I thought she might say something more, but instead she turned back to the river, leaning slightly over the railing. We talked for hours after that, about things that had nothing to do with her decision, about the books she'd read as a kid, about the neighborhood she grew up in, about the ridiculous cat her neighbor owned that always tried to sneak into her apartment. It felt easy in a way I hadn't expected, the kind of ease that comes when you realize someone is letting you see the parts of themselves they usually keep locked away. By the time we started walking back, the city was quieter, the streets nearly empty. She didn't promise me anything as we said goodnight, didn't give me an answer either way. But when she hugged me before leaving, her arms lingered around me for just a moment longer than they needed to, and that was enough to make me believe, if only a little, that maybe she was leaning toward me. 2 days before she had to give her answer, the air in the cafe felt heavier than usual, as if everyone inside could sense that something important was about to happen, even if they didn't know what it was. I was restocking cups behind the counter when the door opened and Leah walked in, carrying something in a small, glossy black box. She set it on the table by the window before even taking off her coat. When I brought her drink over, I couldn't help but glance at the box, the sheen of the ribbon tied around it catching the light. She noticed my eyes and, without a word, slid it across the table toward me. From her, she said simply. I hesitated before opening it, as if touching it would somehow connect me to the person I was already trying not to resent. Inside, nestled in white satin, was a necklace, thin gold with a small diamond pendant, delicate and understated but still obviously expensive. I didn't need to ask how much it was worth, the fact that it was worth more than my yearly rent was obvious. I set it back in the box carefully, my fingers brushing the edge of the satin. It's beautiful, I said, because it was, though the words felt strange in my mouth. Leah gave a small, almost apologetic smile. She says it's just a gift. But it's not, is it? It's part of the offer. A piece of the life she's promising me. I didn't respond right away, unsure of how to keep my voice steady. And what do you think when you look at it? I asked finally. She leaned back, her hands wrapped loosely around her coffee cup. I think it would be easy, she admitted. To put it on, to say yes, to never have to think about bills or rent or whether I can afford to take a day off. It would be safe. She looked out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. But easy isn't the same as right. The truth in that made my chest ache. I wanted to tell her to throw the necklace in the river, to walk away from it and everything it represented, but I knew it wasn't that simple. Choosing me wouldn't just mean saying no to her, it would mean saying no to security. And love, as much as I wanted it to be, was not a safety net. The rest of the day passed in slow, stretched out minutes, and when she came back after closing to walk me home, we barely spoke. The city around us was quiet, the hum of passing cars softened by the damp air. Halfway to my apartment, she stopped suddenly under a street lamp, turning to face me. "If I chose you," she said, her voice careful, "would you regret it when things got hard?" I felt my throat tighten, because I knew she wasn't asking about money or comfort. She was asking if I would still be here when the weight of her decision made her restless, when the nights felt colder, when the doubts crept in. I met her eyes, the yellow light pooling in the shadows between us. "I'd regret letting you go more," I said, my voice low but certain. For a moment she didn't move, just studied me, as if searching for cracks in my answer. Then, without a word, she reached out and took my hand. It was the first time she'd ever done it, her fingers warm against mine, her grip firm but gentle. We walked the rest of the way like that, neither of us speaking, the sound of our footsteps filling the silence. I didn't know if that meant she'd made her choice, but I knew that holding her hand felt more real than any diamond ever could. The night before she was supposed to give her answer, the city felt strangely still, as if even the air was holding its breath. I sat in my apartment with the lights low, nursing a cup of tea I wasn't drinking, staring at my phone like it might decide to tell me what was going to happen. I hadn't seen her since the walk home 2 nights ago, and every minute since had been a tug of war between hope and dread. I told myself she was just thinking, weighing her options, but in the darker corners of my mind I imagined her already sitting in some high-rise apartment, champagne glass in hand, diamond necklace around her throat. When the knock came, it startled me. It wasn't her usual soft, tentative knock, it was sharper, quicker, like she was afraid she might lose her nerve if she waited too long. I opened the door and there she was, hair damp from the misty drizzle outside, coat half-buttoned, eyes brighter than I'd seen in days but still carrying something heavy behind them. She didn't ask to come in, she just stepped inside, her presence filling the small room in a way that made my pulse pick up. She didn't sit. She stood near the window, looking out at the blurred lights of the street, her back to me. "I told her I'd give her my answer tomorrow," she said finally, her voice calm but tight. I swallowed, setting my untouched tea aside. "And do you know what it's going to be?" She turned her head just enough to glance at me, then looked back at the glass. "Not yet. That's why I'm here." My chest tightened, because I could hear the tremor under her steady words. "I needed to see you before I decide. I needed to remember what it feels like to stand here and want something for no reason other than my heart says so." She finally turned fully to face me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The rain tapping against the window filled the quiet. I moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. "I can't tell you what choice to make," I said softly. "But if you choose me, I promise you I'll give you everything I have. It might not be much in the way of money or comfort, but it will be real, and it will be yours." She searched my face for a long time, and I could see her weighing the truth of my words. Then she stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the damp warmth coming off her coat. "You scare me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I know what I'm giving up, but I don't know where we'll land if I choose you." I reached up, tucking a strand of wet hair behind her ear. "That's the thing about love," I murmured. "You never know where you'll land. You just decide who you're willing to fall with." Something in her eyes softened at that, and for the first time in days, her smile reached all the way to her eyes. She didn't say she'd made her decision, but she closed the space between us and kissed me. It wasn't rushed, and it wasn't hesitant, it was steady and deep, like she was memorizing the feel of it. When we finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine and whispered, "I'll see you tomorrow." Then she was gone, leaving the air warmer than it had been before she stepped in, and me standing in the quiet with my heart pounding, knowing that by this time tomorrow, everything would be different. Morning came slower than usual, the gray light creeping in through my curtains like it wasn't sure it was welcome. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes I saw her face, heard the sound of her voice from the night before, felt the press of her lips still lingering against mine. My chest was heavy, my stomach knotted, but there was a strange calm under all of it, like the stillness before a storm you already know will change everything. I kept glancing at the clock, each minute stretching longer than the last. I didn't know when she'd call or if she'd show up in person, but I knew today would be the day. By mid-morning, I couldn't sit still. I cleaned the apartment, made coffee, changed my shirt 3 times, as if somehow the right outfit might tip the universe in my favor. Outside, the drizzle from the night before had stopped, but the air was thick with that dampness that clung to your skin. Just after noon, I heard the knock. This time it was neither sharp nor hesitant, it was steady, certain. My hands trembled as I opened the door, and there she was. No coat, no umbrella, her hair slightly tousled from the wind. She was holding a single envelope in her hand, plain and unmarked. She stepped inside without saying a word, and I noticed her breathing was a little faster than usual. She placed the envelope on my kitchen counter and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read at first, something between relief and fear. "It's done," she said softly. I didn't dare ask what she meant, not yet. She took a step closer, her eyes never leaving mine. I told her no, she continued, and my breath caught. I told her I couldn't take her life because my heart was already somewhere else. The words hit me like a wave, warm and overwhelming. I wanted to smile, to cry, to laugh all at once, but my body just froze for a second, taking in what she'd said. She must have seen the storm on my face because she reached up, cupped my cheek, and whispered, "I chose you." The weight of it sank deep, heavier than any diamond necklace, heavier than any amount of money could ever be. I pulled her into my arms and held her so tightly I was afraid I might hurt her, but she held on just as hard. We stood there for a long time, no rush, no need for anything but the closeness of that moment. When we finally stepped back, she gestured toward the envelope. "It's not much," she said, "just a letter I wrote to remind myself why I walked away. And maybe, to remind you, if things ever get hard." I opened it slowly, my eyes scanning her handwriting. She'd written about the first time she saw me behind the counter, about the way I remembered her order, about the way my laugh made her feel like she could breathe again. She wrote about how money could buy her comfort but not the kind of safety she felt when my hand found hers. By the time I reached the end, my vision was blurred with tears. I looked up at her, unable to find the right words, so I just kissed her again, this time with the certainty that came from knowing she was truly mine, not because she had to be, but because she chose to be. The rest of the day unfolded slowly. We made coffee, we sat by the window, and we talked about everything and nothing. There was no grand plan, no guarantee of what tomorrow would bring, but the uncertainty didn't scare me anymore. She was here, and that was enough. Outside, the clouds began to break, and a soft light spilled into the room, catching in her hair. I watched her smile, watched the way her eyes softened when she looked at me, and I realized that the real offer had never been from a millionaire, it had been from her, every time she let me see the most unguarded parts of herself. And I had said yes without even knowing it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional, romantic, and heartfelt LGBTQ+ stories. Your support helps bring more voices, more love, and more representation to the world. Share this with someone who believes in choosing love over everything else. Let's keep telling stories that matter.